In this lecture, we're going to see how we can overload the subscript operator and use that to read data from our custom class. And the subscript operator is what we have been using to read and manipulate data from our arrays. Remember the syntax we used with square brackets like this to access an element at index 5, for example. We want to use this syntax to manipulate the member variables of our own point class. So what we want to do is really something like this. For example, we have a point object called point1. The member variables have these values we have here, 20.0 and 45.0. And we can print information about our point here. So this is going to work. But what we want to do is to also be able to read information using the syntax here. We're going to specify an index of 0, and this is going to read the x coordinate of our point. And we want to use the index 1 in square brackets like this. And this is going to read the y coordinate of our point object. Suppose this is a syntax that was really useful for whatever you were doing with C++, and you really want this. So the way you do this, you have to overload the subscript operator for your point class. And before we look at this operator, there are a few things you need to keep in mind. The first one is that the subscript operator is a binary operator because it's really going to be working on two pieces of information. The first one is the object where you want to use the subscript operator, and the second one is the index that is going to specify what you want to access about that object. So this is a binary operator. Again, if you look at it here, it's going to be working on two pieces of information. The first one is the point object we want to use to access the member variables. The second piece of information is going to be the index we specify in this square bracket here. So it's going to be working on two pieces of information, and for this reason, it is a binary operator. Another thing you should know is that the subscript operator is one of the operators that must be set up as a member function. C++ doesn't provide a syntax you can use to set this up as a freestanding global non-member function. And if you try to do this in any way, you're going to get a compiler error. So the only way to set up a subscript operator is to do it as a member function. Keep this in mind. Okay, so now that you know this, we're going to see the syntax we can use to set up our subscript operator to read data from our point object. And it is nothing complicated. It is the syntax you see just here. We're going to say operator and specify the operator that we want to overload. This is the syntax you have to use. The return type is going to be double, because we want to return the value in our member variables, and our member variables happen to be of double type. I hope this makes sense. And after this, we're going to specify our index in our parameter list here. So once we have this set up, we're going to set up a pair of curly braces, and inside we're going to set up our body for our function. So if the index is 0, we're going to return the x member variable, and if the index is not 0, it's going to possibly be 1, and we're going to return the y member variable here. This is what we want to do. And here we are using an assert to make sure that the index that are passed are 0 or 1, because if they really give us 2 or 3 or even 100, we don't know what to do with this because our class is having only two member variables. So we can only use the index 0 to return the x member variable and the index 1 to return the y member variable. And any index that is different from 0 or 1, we don't want to process that because that's not going to make sense for our class here. So if somebody passes an index that is different from 0 or 1, we're going to throw an assertion, and this is going to cause for the program to crash with a message as to why the program crashed, and it's going to bring you right here. And this is really cool. This is going to force people to only pass the indexes 0 to return the x member variable or 1 to return the y member variable. This is the setup we can use to use the subscript operator to return the values we have in our member variables. Another thing you should know is that once you have your operator set up and you do a syntax like this, point 1, and you're trying to access the index 0, the compiler is going to transform this syntax to what we have to the right here. Remember, our operator is done as a member function, so the compiler is going to call the operator subscript on the point object, which is really our first operand, and then it's going to pass the index as a parameter to our function here. And this is going to be what happens behind the scenes. Now that you know this, we're going to head over to Visual Studio Code and play with this a little more. Okay, so here we are in our working folder. The current project is Subscript operator reading, because we're going to try and read data from our point objects using the subscript operator. And we're going to be reusing the code from the last lecture because we don't want to be copying all these point classes. That's going to save us some minutes. So we're going to put this in place, and we're going to open this in Visual Studio Code and adapt this to do what we want to do in this lecture here. So we're not going to be doing any addition here. So we're going to take out the code we have in the main CPP file. And in our point class, we don't really want the plus operator. So we're going to take this out because this would just confuse us. We're going to take out the friendship setup we did here on top. And we're going to go in the CPP file and clean this up and remove the clutter we have here. And this is going to be just fine. Let's go to the header and make sure we don't have anything we don't want. And what we want is to be able to use the subscript operator. For example, we have a point object. We're going to call this P1, and we're going to initialize this with 20 and 20, for example. Why not? And what we want to do is to be able to do something like stdc out, and we're going to say P1x, and we want to use the subscript syntax to access that. For example, we want to be able to say P1 and say square brackets and specify the index, and this is going to give us the x member variable. Let's say that this prints the x coordinate, and if we do stdc out P1y, this is going to give us the y coordinate from our point. So let's say that the first index, or the index of 1, is going to give us the y coordinate, and this is going to be 20. Let's say the first coordinate was of 10, and we're going to specify 10 here just to make this a little more interesting. We want the syntax here to work, and for this to work we have to set up a subscript operator for our point class. So let's do this. Please remember that subscript operators are binary operators in that they are going to be working on two pieces of information. The first one is going to be the object you call the subscript operator on, and the second piece of information is going to be the index here. So this is a binary operator. Another thing is that the subscript operator can only be overloaded as a member function. C++ doesn't support to do this as a non-member function, which is a global standing free function that we could do on the outside of the class. C++ doesn't support this. If you try to do this, you're going to get a compiler error. So we can only do this as a member function. We're going to do this as a public member function because we want to be able to call this from the outside. And it's going to be returning double because we want to return the values in our member variables here. We're going to call this operator subscript, and it is going to take a size t parameter, and that's going to be our index. And this is going to be a const member function because it's not going to be modifying anything in our member variables here. And what we're going to do is something like, if the index is 0, we're going to return the mx member variable. If the index is 1, we're going to return the y member variable. So let's do this. We're going to make this super simple, and we're going to use if statements. And we're going to say if index equals 0, we're going to return mx, and also we're going to return my. Okay, this is going to do. Let's make sure we are typing my here, and take out the spaces we don't need in here. And now if we go to the main function, we're going to see that the syntax is really working. Our subscript operator is being picked up by the compiler, and it is going to do what we want. If we run this program, For P1X, we're going to print 10. For P1Y, we're going to print 20, because if the index is 0, we're going to return the MX member variable. If the index is not 0, it's going to return the MY member variable. Let's build and run this program. We're going to use GCC for that here. And the build finished successfully. We're going to bring up a terminal window to be able to run this program. We're going to run it. And we're going to see that P1X is 10 and P1Y is 20. This is what we expect. But we have a problem here. If we try and specify 10, for example, as our index, this is going to return what we don't expect. It is going to return the Y member variable, because for anything that is not 0, we are going to return the Y member variable. And this is probably not what you want. Because we have only 2 member variables in our class, it would be better if we had some kind of mechanism to only work on 2 indexes, 0 and 1. For the index 0, we're going to return the X member variable or the X coordinate. And for the index of 1, we want to return the Y coordinate. And for anything that is not 0 or 1, we want to give some kind of error. One might want to use static assert and say we want to static assert that the index is 0 or 1, but static asserts are not going to work in this case because this thing, the index, is the runtime value. It is something you specify at runtime when your program is running. So this is not a constant expression, and static asserts only work for constant expressions. So the only solution we really have here is use dynamic asserts. And for this to work is to include the CAssert header. And what we need to do in this function is to make sure that the indexes are what we want. And what we want to do is to say assert, and we're going to assert that the index is either equal to 0, that's what we want to test for, or the index is equal to 1. So we're going to put this in here. And after this, we're going to put a semicolon. And if any of this condition fails, we're going to throw an assertion and we're going to crash our program at runtime. And we're going to bring people to this line here. They're going to know that they passed an index, which is really not making sense. And now we have a protection against doing something like this. If somebody tries to build and run this program, the program is going to build and run just fine, but it's going to crash. Let's run Rooster and show you that, and we're going to see that the program just crashed and it is going to say assertion failed, and it's going to say index equals 0 or index equal 1, and it's going to tell you exactly where it failed. It failed in the header of our point class at line 16. And if we go there, we're going to see that we tried to do something illegal here. We passed an index which is really not valid. And this is a result of what we did in the main function here. And this is really cool. Now we're going to know that we passed an index which is not valid. We're going to change this to 1. We're going to build our program again, and everything is going to be fine. And this is really all I had to share in this lecture, showing you how you can set up the subscript operator for your own class. The syntax is what you see here. You have to specify the return value. Just specify a type that makes sense for whatever it is you are doing. We're going to say operator subscript, and we're going to say the index, and we're going to pass our index as a parameter here. One thing you should know is that if you do something like this on line 9, behind the scenes, the compiler is going to call the subscript operator. And what the compiler is going to do is something like this. We're going to uncomment this line here, and then we're going to say P1, and then we're going to say operator subscript, and we're going to specify 0 as our parameter. This is what the compiler is going to do behind the scenes, and this is going to work. You should really know this. So we're going to build and run this, and you're going to see that the build is just fine. We're going to clear and run Rooster, and it is what we expect here. Again, this is all I had to share. I hope you find this lecture interesting. We are going to stop here in this one. In the next one, we're going to show you that you can use the subscript operator and actually modify the member variables you have in your class here. And we're going to do this by returning a reference in our subscript operator here. We're going to do this in the next lecture, so go ahead and finish up here and meet me there.